beg your pardon. That's better. Pastor Don Piper was a very happy man. He had enjoyed a 3-day conference of the Baptist General Convention of Texas at the Trinity Pines Conference Centre on the shores of Lake Livingston, 2 hours north of Houston, and was heading home to his family and church responsibilities. Even the last speaker did something most unlike Baptist ministers, he says. He'd finished early. So after a quick brunch, Don slid behind the wheel of his 3-year-old Escort for the journey home. It was cold and raining steadily. He had 2 options. He could travel southeast to Livingston and then take Highway 59, or he could go back to the town of Trinity, then southwest on the State Highway 19 to Huntsville, and pick up the Gulf Freeway, Interstate 45. He says he had always taken the Livingston route previously, so this time he would make a change and take the Gulf Highway. Now reading from his book, 90 Minutes in Heaven, page 18. I pulled out of the Trinity Pines, turned right, and headed down Texas Highway 19. He goes on, I didn't have to drive far before I reached Lake Livingston. About 2 miles, in fact. But to do that, he would have needed to have turned left out of the gates. He then describes the causeway and rusty bridge at this site and says, "This was my first time to see this bridge." Again, we have a problem. The only way he could use the Livingston route, as he says he had always done previously, was by crossing that bridge and causeway. He adds that at the time of writing his story in 2004, the old bridge had been replaced with a new one alongside it. This is the current Google Earth image of the site. There is no evidence of an old bridge to be seen. It seems likely that he did, in fact, turn right, travelling west to the Trinity Township, then south toward Huntsville. Coming into Riverside, there is another causeway leading to a bridge over the Trinity River and its floodplain. This bridge was built in 1940. In 2003, it was replaced by a 4-lane bridge built alongside it. It remains accessible for northbound traffic, but is mainly used for pedestrian traffic. As late as 2013, it was being advertised by a local estate agent as a place for special occasions. And this lady assures us that this is the bridge where Don Piper came to grief. The newspaper report from the time also reports that the accident occurred on Highway 19 at the Trinity River Bridge. Don describes what happened. The steady rain had turned into a cloudburst. About 11:45, just before I cleared the east end of the bridge, read Southern, he's clearly still thinking of the Livingston Lake Bridge, an 18-wheeler driven by an inmate, a trustee at the Texas Department of Corrections, weaved across the centre line and hit my car head on. The truck sandwiched my small car between the bridge railing and the driver's side of the truck. All those wheels went right on top of my car and smashed it. The semi was being followed by 2 prison officers in a pickup who immediately called for a backup by radio. The call was relayed to the nearest ambulance station and paramedics were on the scene within minutes. They checked Don's pulse. There was none. He had been killed instantly. They covered the wreck with a tarp and proceeded to check the injuries of the occupants of the other cars that had been sideswiped by the semi. They were minor and did not require hospitalisation. Now, state law required that a coroner or a JP had to certify the deaths before the body could be removed from the wreck. And of course, the jaws of life would be needed to extricate the body. Pastor Dick Onorecker and his wife had left Trinity Pines just a few minutes before dawn, but it was cold and they'd stopped to get a coffee. So they were now following Don, and about 12:40 they were stopped in the traffic jam. Don walked down to the scene and asked a policeman if there was anybody that he could pray for. The policeman said, "He's dead. Can't do anything for him." It didn't make sense, but Dick felt that God wanted him to pray for this man. Now, that may have been fine for a Catholic priest, but I don't think it was in the Baptist manual. The policeman warned him it was a gruesome sight. Dick responded, "I was a medic in Vietnam, that doesn't worry me." "Okay, do what you like," the policeman said. Dick crawled under the tarp, through where the hatchback had been, reached over the back seat, put his hand on the man's shoulder and began to pray. Strangely, perhaps, he prayed that there would be no brain damage or internal injuries. The man's dead. Why pray that way? At 1:15, the paramedic checked his pulse again, still nothing. Dick alternated between praying and singing. Then, as he began to sing, "What a friend we have in Jesus," Don began to sing with him. Dick slithered out of that wreck, yelling for the paramedic, "The man's alive, he's not dead, he started singing with me." Who was going to believe him? Not this paramedic. He knew when a man was dead and had been for an hour and a half. "Listen to me. I'm going to lie down on this bridge, and if you don't come over here, you're going to have to run over me to get away." Mumbling under his breath, the paramedic walked over, reached under the tarp, and found Don's right arm. Action exploded. But still, they had to wait for the jaws of life to arrive. Finally, they reached the local hospital, where the doctor said, "No hope." They reached the Huntsville Hospital about 2:30. There, the decision was made that he had to go to Houston. The Life Flight helicopter couldn't fly because of the weather, so it meant another 80-mile ambulance journey. The driver asked how fast he should drive. "Pedal to the metal, man, we've got to get there now." At 6:20, they pulled into the Herman Memorial Hospital in Houston. Then came 11 hours of surgery. the first of many more to come. When he became conscious the next day, the doctor told him, "You're very seriously injured. But the good news is you have no head or thoracic injuries." Good news? Incredible news. Nobody could believe a body so badly smashed could have been spared these injuries. There followed 105 days in hospital, more than 30 more surgeries, months of agonising pain without let-up, and emotional trauma such as few have experienced. Perhaps the worst of that trauma was what had happened to him in those 90 minutes. He had gone to the gates of heaven and been met by crowds of people he had known, all of whom had died in his lifetime. They rushed to surround him, smiling, shouting and praising God. He recognised his grandfather, who embraced him in welcome. Mike Wood was there, who had invited him to Sunday school, led him to Jesus, and then had been killed in a car wreck at 19. And they kept on coming. His great-grandfather, teachers, classmates, all people who had influenced him during his life, all radiantly joyful. Everything he experienced was like a first-class buffet for the senses, vivid, dazzling colours, no sense of time, forcing the ageing process, sounds in glorious harmony, and countless songs of praise being sung simultaneously, yet with never a moment of discord. Think about that one. He saw the gate of pearl and inside the paving stones of gold. Then, he says, as suddenly as I had arrived at the gates of heaven, I left them. Can you wonder that many times as he lay helpless in that hospital bed, racked with excruciating and unrelenting pain, he would cry out to God, "Is this what I came back for? You brought me back to earth for this?" And he couldn't even think of telling anybody about what he'd been through. Not even his wife. It was nearly 2 years before he began to open up to one of his closest friends, Pastor David Gentiles. It was David who had brought him through the crisis on the 6th day of his stay in ICU. Don couldn't take it anymore. His lungs choked with pneumonia. He wanted to die again. But David had said, "We won't let you die. You understand that, Don? We won't let you give up. Just let me go." "No, you are going to live. We won't let you die." "If I live, it'll be because you want me to." We are going to pray. We're going to pray all night. I want you to know that those of us who care for you are going to stay up all night in prayer for you. The next day, the pneumonia was gone and the crisis was over. And now David gently leads his friend in opening up the book he had kept closed for those 2 years. He had asked Don what he had learned from his accident and the recovery process. Don mentioned several things and then added, "But in the midst of all this suffering and despondency, I have learned that heaven is real." David raised his eyebrows. "What do you mean by that?" Slowly, hesitantly, I shared a little about my brief visit to heaven. "Tell me more," he said. "I died in that accident. The next moment I stood in heaven. He leaned forward and I saw the excitement in his eyes. The more I shared, the more animated he became. After I had shared my experience in heaven, a peaceful silence filled the room. David finally nodded and asked, "Why haven't you talked about this before?" As he gently probed Don's thinking, all the anger and frustration came bursting out. "My body's a mess. I'll never be healthy again. I'm constantly in pain. I'm still processing this because frankly, it all seems cruel to me." Can you blame him? Gently, David suggested, "Is it possible that God took you to heaven and brought you back for you to share what happened to you? Don't you realise what a powerful encouragement you can be to others?" His words shocked me. I had been so focused on myself, I hadn't thought about anyone else. Don cautiously began to follow David's advice and found that he was right. The retelling of his experience did bring comfort and assurance to many people. His book was published in 2004 and stayed on the New York Times bestseller list for more than 5 years, with over 6 million copies sold. A feature-length film was released in September 2015. Predictably, the critics, the all-powerful, rubbished it. 2 reviews from Catholic websites gave it a good blessing. Other reviews vary between those 2 limits. But perhaps the one that caused me the most distress was one by Pastor Jim Osman of the Kootenai Community Church in Idaho, dated July 19, 2017. Now, some of the criticisms he makes are valid. We would agree with them. But the 24 pages of that review are characterised by a continual process of denigration, often taking Don's words out of context and reading into those words what clearly was never intended. He concludes with 3 suggested explanations for Don's experience. 1, he is lying. 2, it was a drug-induced hallucination. 3, it was a demonic deception. No other possibility is given any consideration. Even more surprising is that when I checked his statement of belief on the very same website, I found that he holds the same view that when we die, we go straight to heaven or hell. So, what should be our attitude to this story? Let me say right now, I believe Don Piper told the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, as he saw it. Keep in mind that everything he described is in perfect accord with Baptist theology. When you die, you go to heaven or hell. Simple. Did he get everything right? No. As we saw, his memory played tricks with him with regard to where it happened. But that's hardly surprising. He says he has a few memories of the crash, but most of the details came from the reports of others. And I know from personal experience that even police reports can get it wrong. Was his return to life a miracle? There is no other way to describe it. We can survive about a month without food, a few days without water, a few minutes without air, and a few seconds without blood flowing through every part of our bodies. No, the only part of the story we can question is Don's belief that he actually went to heaven and returned. Is there a satisfactory explanation? I believe there is. Come with me to John 11, verse 11. 2 days after Jesus receives the request to come and heal Lazarus, he says to his disciples, "Our friend Lazarus sleepeth, but I go that I may awaken him out of sleep." They protested, naturally enough, that sleep was what he needed at this time. Then Jesus said unto them plainly, "Lazarus is dead." I don't know about you, but when I sleep, I often dream. And those dreams have much in common's description of what he saw in those 90 minutes. There may be a sequence of events, but there's no time involved in that sequence. Don seems to believe that what he experienced occupied the 90 minutes between his death and restoration. But this is not necessarily so. It could have been a matter of seconds. Dr. Raul Vincente of the University of Tartu, Estonia, reports the case of an 87-year-old patient who developed epilepsy. He was being assessed with continuous electroencephalography when he had a heart attack and died, giving researchers a probably unique opportunity to study brain activity at and around the moment of death. The report stated, just before and after the heart stopped working, we saw changes in a specific band of neural oscillations which are involved in high cognitive functions such as concentrating, dreaming, meditation, memory retrieval, information processing, and conscious perception. He went on. The brain may be playing a last recall of important life events just before we die, similar to ones reported in near-death experiences. Scientific American ran a feature on the 1st of June 2020, which included the following lines from Dr. Christoph Koch. Near-death experiences, or NDEs, are triggered during singular life-threatening episodes when the body is injured by blunt trauma, a heart attack, asphyxia, shock, and so on. About 1 in 10 patients with cardiac arrest in a hospital setting undergoes such an episode. Thousands of survivors of these harrowing touch-and-go situations tell of leaving their damaged bodies behind and encountering a realm beyond everyday existence, unconstrained by the usual boundaries of space and time. These powerful, mystical experiences can lead to permanent transformation in their lives. NDEs are not fancy flights of the imagination. They share broad commonalities. Becoming pain-free, seeing a bright light at the end of a tunnel, and other visual phenomena, detaching from one's body and floating above it, or even flying off into space, out-of-body experiences. They might include meeting loved ones, living or dead, or spiritual beings such as angels, a Proustian recollection, or even review of lifetime memories, both good and bad. You've heard the saying, my life flashed before my eyes. Or a distorted sense of time and space. And in his closing remarks, this scientist, as he says, committed to the rational, says this: why the mind should experience the struggle to sustain its operations in the face of loss of blood flow and oxygen as positive and blissful, rather than panic-inducing, remains mysterious. Mysterious indeed. Unless you see the hand of a loving Creator, making the passing of his children as easy as possible. Do you see Don's experience mirrored here? I do. And I ask myself what I might experience if I were to go through the same things as he did. Given my Adventist mindset, I think it might be something like Clyde Prevont's beautiful representation of the resurrection. I'm sure it would include meeting our parents, who devoted their lives to us and our needs, and seeing my first little sister restored to her mother's arms. Rosalie Joy came home at 1 week of age. We buried her 6 weeks later. So many people and so many events to invade my mind. So, my friends, my message this morning is simple. Let us not get hung up over the theological errors of our brothers and sisters in other communions of faith. They are in God's keeping, doing his will and sometimes failing, within the limits of their understanding, just like us.